Donald Trump is not Joe Biden. Okay. Joe Biden had a very particular attitude about how to get things done in Ukraine to repel Putin, to restore peace and economic prosperity to the Ukrainians. And he failed. There's just no doubt that, President Trump would say he failed. Biden failed by not being intimidating enough to encourage Putin to encroach into Ukraine. But then I don't know how long Joe Biden would have had to have been president for his plan to succeed. But the proof's in the pudding. It didn't. His plan basically was to support a sustained military and financial support for the Ukrainians, to put sanctions on the Russians, not fully comprehensive, but pretty intense sanctions, to strengthen NATO, to work closely with NATO as a form of deterrence, to allow Ukraine to strike against Russia, but with guardrails. It didn't want Russia to feel they might get some sort of World War III situation going on. And then finally talked a lot about a post-war integration and security framework. But that combination of things, very traditional, centrist notion supported by the establishment of both parties, produced a forever war with American Congress, American people being asked again and again to provide billions and billions of dollars to support Ukraine, not a particularly big burden on the Europeans, even though it's in their backyard. And again, just no arguing with it. The Biden policy was an unmitigated failure, didn't deter Putin, and it tested the willingness of both Congress and the American people to continue to fund an unpopular war that didn't seem to have an ending. Donald Trump ran on saying he'd have a very different strategy. And that very different strategy involved a different point of view. And we saw that from the time he took office. First of all, shifting the security burden to Europe, saying to the Europeans, both in terms of NATO in general and in terms of dealing with the crisis between Russia and Ukraine, it's going to be on the Europeans. The U.S. will be involved. The U.S. will help, but it's not going to be an American financed or American dominated strategy. Second, pushed for peace talks. Joe Biden didn't talk to Putin at the end of his presidency. Very few European leaders did. And Donald Trump's view is, if there's going to be an end to a war, there's going to be peace talks. The alternative end to the war is Putin winning the war. And so if there's going to be an end to the war, there's going to be peace talks. And if there's going to be peace talks, you can't sit around and wait for Putin and Zelenskyy to set up the peace talks. It's got to be set up by the American president. So look, I'll just be clear. This isn't over. Trump hasn't succeeded, but it's not possible to end it without something akin to an American president leading the way, saying we need peace talks. And he said during the campaign he would do it in the first day. And that wasn't real, right? That wasn't real. But what he also said was he would get it done, and that it required talking. And now we're having talks. So that's a big thing. You need talks. You need peace talks. And we saw on Friday he kicked off talking directly to Putin. Then we saw this week on Monday, kicked off talking to Zelenskyy and the Europeans. And people can say, well, it's already August. Well, it's still pretty rapid under the circumstances. And his envoy, Mr. Witkoff, has been pushing for that. Third is saying the quiet part out loud. Putin's not going to end the war without some sort of territorial compromise. You can call it land swaps. You can call it, a nightmare for the status of free nations. But there's going to have to be territorial compromise, and the president's been relatively open about that, saying that has to happen. Fourth element of his plan is the selective use of sanctions to try to get leverage. He's threatened sanctions. He's put on some. Contrary to the image of the president and contrary to his sometimes very friendly rhetoric towards Putin, he's not been opposed to it, but he's used sanctions as much as a threat as he has as a tool. And then finally, very transactional, very high pressure diplomacy, saying to Putin, this has to happen, saying to Zelenskyy, this happens, saying to the Europeans, this has to happen, and not giving a lot of speeches about what a murderous dictator Putin is. Donald Trump's under no illusions about what kind of person Putin is, but he just doesn't think that calling Putin names is the way to get him to the table. So again, the contrast between what Biden did that failed and what Trump did that may succeed is pretty stark. And no one who studied their careers and their past statements about foreign policy and national security should be surprised that Donald Trump has taken a different route. Now, again, it's too soon to say, as I sit here and talk to you today, that this is going to work. But to some extent, it's already worked. To some extent, it's already worked because now Putin and Zelenskyy and the Europeans and the world are talking about the prospects of a deal that would end the war. And I hear liberal commentators say Donald Trump's doing this because he wants to win a Nobel Prize. And there's no doubt he'd like to win the Peace Prize. But anyone who knows Donald Trump will tell you he hates watching children be killed. His wife is very upset about what's happened to children during this war. And he knows that America is singular. And it's the great paradox of Donald Trump's view of foreign policy. He doesn't want forever wars. He doesn't want America's treasure to go towards military budgets that are wasteful. But he does recognize that American strength, American influence, American prestige, all through the office of the American president is singular. And so this series of tactics and the strategy he's using could lead to the end of the war. Might not, but it could. So the first thing to understand again is this is different. This is a different way of operating. So what is the Trump strategy? Again, it's to, first of all, shift the burden to Europe, right? He doesn't think that the United States should be dominating the process and paying for the process. So the leader, but not the person writing the check. So how does that work in practice? Donald Trump, this extraordinary meeting in Washington at the White House, where the president led the Europeans and said this has to happen, and vitally important to the change. Here's the president talking. This is S1 as part of the day-long meetings on Monday at the White House.
People are being killed, and we want to stop that. When it comes to security, there's going to be a lot of help. It's going to be good. They are first line of defense because they're there. They're Europe. Again,
Not Joe Biden. Would Joe Biden have flown to meet Putin? No. Would he have had the kind of meeting that occurred in Washington with Zelenskyy and the Europeans? I think he would have liked to, but the point is he didn't. So that's number one, which is Trump is not Biden on Ukraine. Second point is Zelenskyy now learned his lesson. Everybody saw what happened the last time he came to the White House, right? Zelenskyy comes, he says things and does things he shouldn't have done. If you know anything about Donald Trump, he appeared ungrateful. He appeared argumentative. He didn't wear nice clothes. And he seemed to think that he could beat Donald Trump by out-talking him and talking him confrontationally in a photo op. So here is some of the way Zelenskyy behaved in take two.
Honor to have the president of Ukraine with us.
I was very thankful to your wife again, Mr. President, for the letter about our abducted children. We had very good conversation with President Trump.
Very good.
And it really was the best one, maybe the best one will be in the future.
I have to laugh a little bit about that last soundbite where he says, this is our best conversation ever, but we may still have a better one. And again, that was reflective of the mindset that Zelenskyy brought to this meeting, which is you got to say thank you a lot. That was the key thing he failed to do the last time he was in the Oval Office. And he spent his day in the public part of the conversations, at least, saying thank you, literally saying thank you over and over again. We played a couple of them, but there were plenty more. Thanking the president's wife for sending a letter through the President Trump to Putin about the missing children in Ukraine. And, Zelenskyy was a comedian and an actor before he was a politician. And he clearly learned his lines correctly yesterday. Very important performance, very important role, playing the guy who gets that he's the junior partner here, the guy who's grateful for America's role, the guy who is determined to say and do the right things. And of course, the clothes. He didn't wear a tie and a jacket, but he did wear a nice jacket with a nice shirt, and the president joked with him about it. You don't have to be a body language expert. You know, sometimes a news organization will hire a body language expert. You don't need to be an expert. The body language between those two guys yesterday was very warm. From the time the president greeted him and kind of gave him a little hug and teased him about his clothes as they sat together, Zelenskyy was so careful not to interrupt the president, to agree with the president. And You could say, well, why does he have to do that? What does that have to do with war and peace? Well, that's what Donald Trump expects. America, as Donald Trump talks about it all the time, has spent so much time and money on trying to help Ukraine, and he wants Zelenskyy to reflect that reality. Number three, the European leaders have stepped up. This is incredible what's happened. And again, you think about the short history of the Trump administration, conflicts with Europe over trade, although they got to deal with the EU on tariffs. Donald Trump brings to this his legacy from the first term of saying NATO needs to be redone, criticizing Europe on a pretty regular basis. And then the Vice President Vance, goes to Europe and gives a very tough speech saying to the Europeans, in effect, your culture needs to be upgraded, your economics need to be upgraded, your military needs to be upgraded, your role in the world needs to be upgraded. I was in Europe around that time, and I heard from a lot of European leaders and business leaders and political folks saying, oh, Vance is worse than Trump. They hate us. They hate Europe. No, they don't hate Europe. And the display at the White House on Monday, never seen anything like it. And a lot of folks who've covered White Houses will tell you the same thing. The level of unity, the level of support for President Trump's vision, and the general lack of division reflected even in private quotes is surprising given the history of tension between Donald Trump and the Europeans. But Donald Trump does not hate Europe. In fact, he loves Europe. Donald Trump doesn't want Europe to disappear. He doesn't want the U.S.-European relationship to be destroyed. He wants it to be strengthened. And you saw in this meeting throughout the day and the interviews that a lot of the European leaders did afterwards, you saw praise of President Trump, some of it gratuitous and meant to flatter him. But you also saw a real agreement about what they're trying to do here. They're trying to get a Putin-Zelenskyy meeting, maybe one with Trump as well. They're trying to give up as little land from Ukraine as possible. And they're trying to provide a security guarantee for the Ukrainians that is a partnership with Europeans like the British and the French putting troops on the ground in Ukraine, and the United States helping with air power, with intelligence, with other things, and providing American-made weapons, best in the world, to the Europeans and the Ukrainians that they would pay for, not the United States. Here's a little bit of the president talking about the Europeans and how they've come to the table as allies and friends. This is S3, please.
We'll let you know that maybe later today. We're meeting with 7 great leaders of great countries also, and we'll be talking about that. They'll all be involved. They are first line of defense because they're there. They're Europe.
Okay, fourth thing to know about where things stand between the U.S. and Russia and Ukraine and Europe is there are 2 balls in Putin's court now. As I sit here and talk to you today, the president has expressed great confidence Monday and Tuesday that Putin is willing to meet with Zelenskyy. The Russians haven't been as clear about that. But this is the big development. It's not just the logistical thing. You're not going to get a settlement in this war unless Putin and Zelenskyy sit down. The president has suggested, well, they're getting along well enough that they should meet, and suggesting that after they meet, maybe the 3 of them should meet. Will that meeting happen? Don't know. But it's essential. And this is the president's point of view, and I think he's right. They're eventually going to have to sit down. Now, Putin maybe wants that meeting in Russia. I don't think the president's going to let that happen, and I don't think Zelenskyy would go for it. But they need to pick a place that everybody's comfortable with and press the issue. Ball's in Putin's court, though. Zelenskyy and Trump would show up tomorrow anywhere if Putin would agree, except I think Russia. Putin agreed to meet. Second ball that's in Putin's court is whether, in fact, he will accept a U.S.-managed process where there are British and French boots on the ground. We'll see. I don't think, given that the president talked to Putin and Witkoff has talked to Putin, I don't think the president would be pushing this and be supporting this if he thought it was going to be rejected out of hand by Putin. But Moscow has, through various spokespeople, been lukewarm at best to the concept. They're deathly afraid of Ukraine's integration into NATO. This would not be that. And the president, a very elegant solution he and his team have come up with. This is not a NATO force that would keep the peace. This is a NATO-like, NATO-style peacekeeping force made up of NATO members, but not NATO itself. And that elegance, that little twist, that little tweak, they appear to be hoping is enough to get Putin to sign off on it. But again, that's what we're watching for now. Will Putin agree to a meeting not a staff level meeting, but a meeting directly with Zelenskyy and then with Trump? And will Putin consider an agreement where he gets land, but there's also the security force? Will he actually accept that? So we'll have to wait and see. Finally, if he doesn't accept those things, Putin doesn't step up, Trump's going to have to. This is, I think, where the president finds himself now. He has to make a decision. If Putin, he presses super hard for Putin to agree to a meeting, Putin to agree to this deal, again, the main terms of which are land in return for security guarantee. If he doesn't, what does he do? Sanctions, green lighting what Joe Biden would never green light, which is for the Europeans to use advanced American technology, weapons technology, to strike Moscow, to strike deep inside Russia, rather than just fighting largely on the terrain of Ukraine. We'll see. I'm sure the president hopes he doesn't have to make those decisions. And maybe he has to threaten them. Maybe he has to say to Putin again, which he may or may not have said in Anchorage, if you don't agree to a deal soon, time's up. And he set a deadline before and he dropped it, but maybe he'd set another deadline. Maybe he'd say to Trump, would say to Putin, if you don't agree to a meeting soon, if you don't agree to this kind of security guarantee for Ukraine, sanctions are coming on big time. Military might is coming at you big time. And of course, he could turn it on or threaten it and turn it back off. But the big mystery here that no one can solve in the American government is, why is Putin even at the table? Is it purely a stalling tactic? Does he have some reason, economic, military, some other reason to want to conclude this war? There's enough of a reason that Donald Trump has got this to happen. But make no mistake, again, this hasn't happened because of Putin, hasn't happened because of Zelenskyy. It's happened because Donald Trump assumed the presidency with a very different strategy for ending the war than Joe Biden had. I don't know that it'll succeed, and it hasn't been done perfectly. But if the war needs to end, and everyone in Europe thinks it needs to end, everyone in Ukraine thinks it needs to end, Donald Trump's strategy that I've outlined here is going to be the reason that it's possible. All right, here's a good question for you. Is a continued divide between Donald Trump and the Fed putting us behind the curve again? Can the Federal Reserve take the right action at the right time, or are all of us going to be looking at a potential economic slowdown? And what does all this mean for your savings? Consider diversifying now with gold through Birch Gold Group. For decades now, gold has been viewed as a safe haven in times of economic stagnation, when there's global uncertainty, and when we're dealing with high inflation. Birch Gold makes it incredibly easy for you to diversify some of your savings into gold. If you've got an IRA or an old 401k, you can convert that into a tax-sheltered IRA in physical gold. Or you can just buy some gold to keep in your safe. But first, either way you want to get educated, Birch Gold will send you a free info kit on gold. Just text the word NEXT to this number, 989898. Again, text NEXT to 989898. Consider now diversifying a portion of your savings into gold. That way, if the Fed doesn't stay ahead of the curve for the country, you stay ahead of the curve for yourself.